Hi everyone, this is Alain. I'm with my friend Pamela here, and we've been talking about this webinar for a while. I know we've postponed it a few times, but let's dig into this subject. And when we decided to move forward with a webinar and inviting our favorite lawyer on the planet, Pamela Taylor, it was really to have a conversation about being responsible. Yes, compliance, but also to contribute to the sustainability of the organization. And I think that's a key component to community involvement that we tend to forget sometimes. Being on a board is not just showing up, but if we just do a few little things, we could leave the organization in a better state than it was when we came in. And that's a bit the intent of today. And I want to welcome Pamela with us today. Hi, Pam.
Hi, and thank you, Anna. I know this is it's a wonderful opportunity to be able to go through some basics that may not be so basic for everybody. So don't feel bad if it sounds new and different and maybe a little frightening. So our job is to try and make it a little less frightening.
Excellent.
Anyway,
Absolutely. And as we move through the content here, I just want to reassure everyone that everything that we're sharing today is going to be made available to you. You'll see it online on the diligence.solutions website and on the discadus.com website. And it's all going to be free for you to download. Just give us about a week to get things done. Soon, everything that we're sharing will also be in our newsletter. So you're sure to get a copy of everything that we're doing. So rest assured that we have no problem if you do screen captures of what we're sharing. And if you want a copy, it'll be available to you because I'll be showing some templates of things that we've done with clients in the past and that we've worked on in our governance program. So yeah, let's dig in if that's okay. So why we're doing this webinar, it's really to anchor the board of directors in responsible and sustainable governance. So not just doing governance to fix something, because we often talk about governance only when things are going badly. No, we want governance to be a habit. And we all know that people who have better habits usually are a bit more responsible, more disciplined. So let's connect those two dots together is if we are responsible in our governance, so that means we have the better habits, it gives sustainability to the organization. It's also to encourage reflection on potential improvements that you might want to do with your board. Either sit down with your chair and talk about it, or sit down with your governance secretary or the person that's responsible for the governance committee, or it might motivate you to sit on that committee. We'll see. And also to establish compliant and responsible governance to ensure long-term sustainability for the organization. So that was our motivation. So let's dig into just a few little components. And I know we've been through these definitions before. I just want to go through this really quickly so we can get into the meats and potatoes of what we're doing tonight, and so we can hear Pamela on these different, I would say, ethical, legal things that we need to consider. Our
okay.
definition of governance, as you know, if you look in many different resources or books or even online, you'll see that there's tons of different definitions when it comes to governance. We really broke it down into three things. The first thing is about all of the tools and the mechanisms and the structures and the behaviors and the practices that allows the board to make the very best decision for the organization. Not for you, not even for members, but for the organization. You're doing it in the place of members, but you're actually there to, to serve the organization, to make sure that it is really in a great state and every decision that you're making is to help the organization be better. That's the first part. Make good decisions. The second part is to be compliant. So as to ensure the organization conducts and establishes operations that support the organization in meeting all of its duties and obligations. So financial, legal, ethical, and I added this little piece here, fulfilling their social responsibilities, even though that's not in the nonprofit law or framework. It's mostly in publicly traded organizations have to have some social responsibility policy and programs. But I still put it there because in nonprofits, everyone talks about. We need to be a responsible organization in our society and have impact on it. So I decided to put it there anyways. And the third one is to um, create a healthy culture of accountability throughout the organization, not just at the board, not just for the executive director. So by practicing due diligence and maintaining a reasonable assurance that things are going well, that they're on track, you're creating a really nice, healthy culture of accountability for everyone in the organization, that mission, vision, values is not just fancy words you put on a t-shirt. It's actually something that we need to be held to account, and the board's going to monitor that. By monitoring it, well, people are going to have to, respond to your expectations. I don't know if you want to add anything to
Mhm.
this, Pamela. It's our really
Yeah,
simple definitions, but
yeah.
is there anything you'd like to add?
Well, yes, a couple things. So first of all, we look at governance. It's kind of like your recipe to how what you want your organization to look like. So you mentioned quickly, about coming to governance when you have a problem, or falling back on your governance guidelines. But in fact, if you've got this structure already, then it's something that is already you're already on the right path. So I think that's really important. Um, the other part of this is just setting that culture of accountability. The tone is set at the top. The board will
Okay.
set the tone. And the board, and it's interesting, we'll get into this a little more deeply. I know Alain will get into it. But the idea that the directors are there on behalf of the members. But the members are there on behalf of the organization. So there's actually four, arguably, and we'll get into this too, sets of interests that the board
Yeah.
members have to keep in mind. So that's just briefly, yeah, the tone is set at the top, and we like that order of having a good governance structure.
I love that. And as we go along today, I think we need to remind ourselves that usually we know this stuff. It's a bit like, I know that I need to sleep better to be healthier. I know that I need to exercise as well and probably eat better and so on. And even though we know these things, if I don't have the right habits, it's still not going to happen. So I love the fact that you call it a recipe. If you put these things together and actually put them together, it's going to give a result. And governance, I just don't want to, pull it out when we need to fix something, is if we practice it daily like we would exercise, we're probably going to get the results we're looking for. I love that, setting the tone at the top. So the 5 habits we're going to break down and unpack today are really basic ones, I know, but I'm hopeful that the tools we're going to present is going to help you, set it in motion for your board as soon as possible, or maybe in the next governance cycle, or in the next year. Let's look at them. The first one is maintain and review a compliance tracking tool. A simple checklist. And I'm going to show a few of them when we get to that. But, I love it when corporate secretaries or board secretaries just have that list of, checking things off and making sure that this is done. And maybe the finance committee is looking at, well, do we did we do our audit, or did we do our review this month, or was the budget approved? And just the simple things that we need to make sure that they're on the agenda, or at least being done once a year, sometimes once a quarter. We could just A checklist feels good, doesn't it, Pam? And I
Mhm.
think that we need to have one.
And I was going to say too, sometimes you get into a cycle. So what I encourage is a cycle of certain activities at a certain time of the year. And
Yeah,
so your checklist becomes easier to monitor because you're thinking, okay, it's March. I guess we're going to be talking to the auditors or
exactly.
whatever. But yeah.
Yeah. Second thing is, and I know not everyone agrees with me here, but I'm still putting it out there. We need to monitor strategic and operational performance. So I know that a lot of consultants like to talk about strategy and how it's important to keep the board in strategy, and the board shouldn't be in operations. And I agree with that. But it still should be nose in, fingers out. I need to know that the fire is not, you know, There's no fire in the kitchen there. So you might not, you shouldn't go in the kitchen, but at least you should keep an eye on making sure that you don't smell natural gas coming out of the oven or something. Anyways,
Yeah,
so
sorry, and
yeah,
I wanted to say, and not to be afraid to go into the kitchen if you do smell smoke,
yeah,
because we've had boards, say, no, but I gotta, I gotta stay out of that kitchen. I said,
yeah.
but your kitchen's burning. So,
Yeah, and ultimately, and we'll look at that later, the board is responsible for the organization. So even if it hires an executive director, if things go badly, they're going to look at you as a board and say, where was the board? And we see that with the, Hockey Canada scandal and the We scandal and all of those scandals out there. We've all heard them say, where was the board? Who adopted those policies? Who was overseeing these? So just keeping an oversight on strategy, that's fine. Vision, is it actually, are we realizing that vision? And then is the mission being implemented effectively and efficiently? That's how I like to call it, is saying, keep an eye on finance. That's fine. I don't think that's where we get into trouble mostly. I think most organizations get into trouble in HR and in not meeting the funders' requirements. And so, how do we keep an eye on that? Well, I'll show you not only an accountability framework, but also a sort of balanced performance dashboard. We'll talk about that. Third is annual review of roles and responsibilities. That's just staying on top of things. I'm not saying you need to change the role of chairs and board members and secretary and treasurer and ED. I'm just saying let's just review so everyone's on the same page, and just so we don't have to address issues too often by signing the code of conduct every year. It reminds everyone of it. So by just having a routine, and we'll show you those tools, maintaining routine and discipline, it almost comes back to same thing for your health. You know that if you have a great routine and you're disciplined, your health's going to be through the roof. It's the same thing for governance. You're going to have a nice, mature, strong governance model that is just a bit ahead of the ambitions of the organization, so you can be there when the organization realizes its vision. So governance is really important. By having a nice, strong governance calendar through routine and discipline, it'll be a home run for you. And you'll be a model of productivity for the rest of the organization by doing that. Does that make sense? I can see you
yeah,
smile, Pamela.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's something to strive for, but I do agree. You've got to be, you have to have that, that sort of discipline around yourself, around your activities.
And you'll
And then it makes it easy.
Absolutely. And you'll see
Mhm,
that all of these habits, we sort of bunched them together because I
mhm,
probably could have put 15 there, but there's five of them there that they all go together.
mhm,
So, and the last one is risk management. So not just have a nice little simple policy that frames it for the board and for the executive director, but also for a simple tool to just keep an eye on risk. At least once a year, we're thinking, so what's threatening the organization, or what could be an issue, or are there any issues that should be in there? Do we have a plan in case that happens? What happens if we lose our executive director just like
mhm,
that, or
mhm,
if we lose a major funder all of a sudden decides not to give us that grant? Those are the two biggest risks right now in most nonprofits.
mhm.
So let's dig into those if that's okay. Any comments for you, Pam, on this?
No, I think that's good because I know we're going to be talking more in depth about all of these things.
Perfect. So when we talk about compliance, we are going to talk about obligations and duties, and those are always defined sometimes in different ways. I'm staying away from roles and responsibilities here. I'm going to stick to um, obligations, what you must do, not things that, oh, let's do it when we have time. No, some things that you would actually check off the compliance list. So it refers to um, formal requirements on individuals, organizations that they must meet um, under agreements, regulations, legal standards, whatever. It's something that if you don't do, there could be or there is going to be an issue. An obligation is usually a binding commitment as well. You agree to this, it's a contract, there's potential consequences if it's not respected. So I think there's key components here that we need to be reminded that for the board, it includes legal issues, the articles of incorporation or incorporation documents might have things in there, internal and external regulations, internal policies and procedures, and probably
Right.
others that exist out there. Pam, what's your take on this?
Um, Contracts, because in many cases, the organization will have obligations to third parties, and in the not-for-profit sector, often to funders. And so if you're going to get your next, draw on your grant, you may have certain obligations you have to fulfill. And, you have a new board, you have new board members, you have a new ED, they may or may not be all that familiar. So then becomes a risk to the organization if for whatever reason it doesn't fulfill these kinds of obligations. So could be with your landlord for your premises that you rent. It could be with it could be with anybody, with contractors who you hired to do work. Could be personal services or for anything else. So yeah, I would say contracts are a big part of this. They're overlaid by all of the regulatory part that you've talked about here. So yeah, your corporate power. Anyway, it goes on.
Yeah,
So
the list, absolutely. I like that one, Pam, because sometimes we just sign things without really looking at them, especially when it comes to funding,
mhm,
because we can't wait to get the funding, and we've been,
yeah,
we did the grant proposal 6 months earlier, and finally it's in, and we want to get to
yeah,
into the
yeah,
delivering for members and or clients.
yeah,
And in the end, we forget that if we don't meet some requirements or
mhm,
obligations, that money can be pulled,
exactly,
or part of it can be pulled, or we might not qualify for the next grant.
exactly,
So I've
exactly.
seen, yeah, and I've seen executive directors keep a simple compliance checklist for every single grant.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, but there's basic ones that you could, monitor in a simple dashboard as well.
Yeah.
Um, Fiduciary, yeah, this is, I, I don't know if you want to go through this with us, Pam, or if you want me to go through it, but
It's up to you. I can talk about fiduciary if you like. I mean, it is a lawyer's term, and lawyers' eyes cross as well when they come across it. So, fiduciary is it's a word we don't use on a day-to-day basis, but it represents a concept that most people are familiar with. So, fiduciary is someone who manages assets or interests on behalf of another in a relationship of trust. So who could that be? That would be your power of attorney, for example. If you have a parent who's ailing, wants to give you authority over their assets. Now, you're not just going to take that authority and go and do what you want to do with those assets. You have been given that special power in a relationship of trust. And what that means is that you are always acting in the interests of the person who has given you that trust. So it comes with the legal and ethical duty to manage the assets with care, loyalty, and integrity, which just expands a bit on what I've said. And the duty includes acting in the best interest of the organization, because this is the duty that's imposed on every director, not on an employee. So make the distinction. Your employees are not subject to a fiduciary duty. They have different duties of loyalty to the employer and things like that. But board members are held to a higher standard. So meaning that there is a presumption that you are acting on behalf of the organization. And when I talked earlier about the different levels in the organization, this means the organization itself, not the membership, just the organization. So that's really broad. So you're acting in the best interest. There is a duty of loyalty, transparency, and accountability, and you must exercise due diligence. So all of those things, pretty heavy, but
uh,
you get Why? Because you're being entrusted with all the assets of the organization and its continued existence. Because if you make bad decisions, you go out of
Yeah.
business.
And we
So,
keep hearing that members, not board members, but members of the organization are the owners, a
mhm,
concept here,
mhm,
conceptual. And at the AGM or the members meeting, this is where they're giving to board members that fiduciary duty, isn't it?
exactly.
We're electing
Exactly.
you or naming you, or sometimes we are naming board members or naming officers to do this. And these are all linked to this
Mhm.
responsibility to do it for the very best interest of the organization
Oh, that's right. And it is
in
the
their place, in their stead, isn't it?
That's right. That's right. So
Okay.
while the members are often seen as the owners, they are not, they are acting themselves as owners in the best interest of the organization. So it's
Yeah.
this concept. And the legal way of describing directors is that they are the directing mind and will of the
Yes.
corporation. So that's kind of
Like
the
that.
directing mind and will. So they hold all the power in terms of being able to act. But again, those actions have to be undertaken in this context.
I love it. Perfect. Thanks. If there's any questions, right, don't hesitate either in the chat or, oh, let me check. Can I see? Let me double check the settings on the chat. I usually forget to do it properly. So if anyone wants to put anything in the chat, just send us your questions through there and we'll be happy to answer those questions. So let me skip. Yeah, we just talked about that.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's fine. And there's 4 legal duties that always come up in most governance training and in the legislative framework. We'll talk about this. You want to go through these quickly, Pam?
Sure.
Yeah.
So first off is the duty to understand and comply with the laws and the regulations governing that organization. And each organization operates within a slightly different framework. If you're in the not-for-profit world, most, if not all, not-for-profits will be subject to the not-for-profit legislation of the province, where they carry on business. So that's kind of number one. Understand, your sort of high level mandate. And number two, duty of loyalty. And this is flows out of your fiduciary duty. You're going to make decisions in the organization's best interest, free of external influence. And that's really important too, the idea of conflicts of interest. The more recent not-for-profit legislation has really beefed up directors' obligations here. So this is something to be aware of. Duty of confidentiality, maintaining discretion regarding board discussions, even when transparency is important. So this understanding that the work that you're doing on the board is confidential, the decisions you make are confidential. There are mechanisms through which you can make some of that information and those decisions more public or more transparent, but they have to be done within the proper framework. And a duty of due diligence. So that every board member must at least make the effort to make a well-informed decision on behalf of the organization. So there is that. Back to Alain's earlier comment about obligation, your obligation to do this.
I think the two that always hit me is number one is I think we need to see it in the way that if we're driving down the street and the speed limit's not posted and you get stopped by the police, you're not allowed to say, I didn't know what the speed was. It's the same concept to me here. You can't sit on a board of a nonprofit organization and just say, oops, I didn't know, so we did something illegal.
Mm-hmm.
That's not, there's the number one here and number 4 go hand in hand. Make the effort. If at least you make the effort, you'll probably be protected enough for the consequence not to be too bad if you make a bad decision.
Yeah.
But if you don't make the effort, then you'll be held responsible. And that's where it's so important to show up, read the reports, ask questions, be present, participate on a committee, just be part of the activities, and that will demonstrate due diligence or duty of care.
Mm.
And I like to, I always think of my math professor when I was in high school. He would always say, show your work. Well, you need to be able to show your due diligence as well.
Mhm.
So it's got to show up somewhere that you were present. So that will be in the minutes. And you got to be able to show that you were involved in
Mhm.
all of the activities. So if you do make a bad decision, and that happens, well, at least you'll be protected. So those two go hand in hand. Inform yourself, it'll demonstrate due diligence, and just participate in the success of the governance model, and it'll work out. So the habit here that we're suggesting is to maintain and review a compliance dashboard. And of course, you know us. I want to show you an example of, oops, that's that's funny. The title's in French, but the rest is in English. So I'm going to translate this, but I'm going to make this template available. This is a simple one. Usually these would be check boxes, and you're just checking everything that the board should be doing in governance and finance, duty of care, um, high level of participation in the meetings can demonstrate duty of care. Board member training, that could be something that's on your list. This is a partial list, and we also have the 100 tasks of an effective board. I'll share those two documents with you, but it's basically just a checklist that if you just systematically go through it, or maybe you put it in the hands of the governance committee so they can look at it in their meeting, making sure that we're compliant, and they report on it. All of this can function together, and it gives the responsibility to the secretary of the board or the chair of the governance committee with a group. They can work on making sure that compliance is there. So that's the first one. Any comments on compliance dashboards, Pamela, and how it might help, or you've
Um,
seen
I
these before?
I think this is a wonderful tool. This simplifies the task because it can seem overwhelming. It can be so, you saw the detail on that. That is a wonderful tool. And I would highly recommend that people start there and build out something that works for your own organization. But that is a wonderful place to start.
I'm going to share with you, Pam, when I did my corporate secretary training with Governance Professionals of Canada, the trainer put a concept on the table that changed everything for me. Was a governance model matures over time.
Mhm.
So just start somewhere. So if there was
Exactly.
the number one recommendation that my colleagues Rob and Julie and Jerry and even Pam would probably put on the table is just start somewhere. What are the minimum things you know you have to do? Start with that list, and the next year or the
Mhm.
next quarter, you'll just add a bit more. And then it'll take its own life over time. And within a year, 18 months, you have a great little compliance dashboard, and you can demonstrate diligence.
Exactly. It's a roadmap. It is a roadmap and it's got all the stops where you need to go. So, it's
Yeah,
very, very, very helpful.
excellent. Let's talk about a bit more about due diligence, because it always comes up. Duty of care, due diligence. There's a few expressions. Um, yeah, you want to just dig it. I know you've spoken about it, so we don't need to spend too much time on it, Pam, but is there
Um,
anything you'd like to add?
yeah, just to highlight here that it's what is the level to which you would be held, and I think this is a reasonable person in similar circumstances. So those words are important because we all come with different abilities to the board table, and like I'm a lawyer, so I'm going to sit at a board table, and I will have different levels of skill and training than other people. There may be people who have other degrees in different areas, accountants. But the point is that you are expected to only bring the best of who you are. And we're not going to expect you to be me and vice versa. It's just you have to bring the best of who you are, as would be expected of a reasonable person in similar circumstances. And the legal test is usually that of a reasonable person. And it's almost boring because it's almost always the same test, but there we are. So that's about all I would add.
And I think, and that's a key component to me, is the fact that we're not expecting you, if you're not a lawyer, to act like one.
Exactly.
We're not expecting you to understand finances the same way a CPA would.
And
So
and the caution on that too, though, is also if I am coming to a board or you're coming to a board with a particular skill set, you're not coming in that capacity. So I
that's
don't
true.
come and act as a lawyer. I am not a lawyer. So I've had many people say to me, well, you know, we had this legal problem on the board and we have a lawyer on the board and I don't understand how that happened. Well, because that lawyer sitting on the board is coming in his or her, I won't say unlawyer capacity, but they're coming with the skills
Yeah.
and training of being a lawyer, but not as a lawyer. So
Yeah.
that's also the other part of it. Don't expect your colleague around the table to be your expert. You're still going to need to hire the expert.
I like that. Absolutely. Um, so the key concepts here is just be prudent. Make thoughtful decisions based on relevant information and risk assessment. So simple questions. What is it? Who is it? Why? How is this? Just by asking questions, and I think most people would say that diligence shows up in questions. Hopefully questions to understand, not to correct or not to, pin someone to the wall, but it's just, am I making the very best decision? And for that, am I asking questions if I don't understand something? So I think that these two concepts go together from the previous slide. I'm not expecting you to be a lawyer, but if you do have a question that's related to a legal responsibility, ask it. Ask the question. And the more you ask questions, and the more, that's why we always tell our clients, if people ask questions during the board meeting, write it in the minutes, not the question, just to write board members ask questions regarding the report and the decision that was made was this. Just the fact that we wrote somewhere that people were asking questions is a
Mhm.
demonstration of diligence. So
Mhm.
of being prudent. Um, the second one is stay informed about governance, finance, laws, general stuff, regulation, develop your competency around the table. If you're brand new to the board, that's perfect, that's fine. Don't stay brand new. I always laugh at the show. I don't know if there's a show on TV, on CTV. It plays every week. It's been on for 8 years. It's called The Rookie. And I keep saying, well, it can't be a rookie anymore. They've been there for 10 years. So it's the same concept here, is that don't stay a rookie either. So go to those governance training, go to that finance training that the board's offering. Continue to develop yourself as a director, and that'll help you demonstrate the diligence that, I'm not just sitting or a warm body in a chair here. I'm actually contributing to the good of the organization. Yeah. The third one to me is participate. So oversight and control does not happen by just you sitting in your chair. Actively monitoring means you're actually reading the reports. You're asking about results. You're ensuring that internal controls are in place, because that's what generates the data. That's what generates reasonable assurance that things are going well. So by looking at the numbers and asking questions and making sure that the controls are in place, and the example is, if you don't go play in the kitchen, that's fine, but make sure that the hinge on the door is working, because you might have to go in. Are
Right.
the
And
reports working? Go ahead, Pam.
yeah, no, this is what I was going to say. You want to make sure you're getting some reports out of your kitchen. So you want to know how the meal's coming. How is it coming along?
Absolutely. And if
Um,
people are satisfied, or are they
yeah,
dying from, exposure to allergens, or
yeah,
what's
yeah,
going on with, yeah.
yeah. Yeah,
Sorry, I interrupted there.
no, it's okay. But I think this is where we get into the discussion about reports and what kinds of reports, and it's important to read them, but they have to. You want to also make sure that the reports you're getting from your ED and from staff actually contain the information that is relevant to the board. So
Yeah.
there's part of the operation. Like, you don't want to get into deep operational detail. That's just not board level stuff. But you do want to make sure you're getting enough information so you can make decisions as a board.
Yeah.
But you do need to make sure you're getting enough information. And sometimes, I mean, I've seen this too, where sometimes staff will just put so much into a board report that you don't have a clue what's going on. So,
Yeah.
so you do have to, this is I think, Anna, of all of this is a really, really important bullet here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's a perfect segue to the next one. Because if you really want to make good decisions or participate in those decisions, you need to monitor. And the monitoring brings the reliable and current information to support decisions.
Mhm.
So, and I know you've heard me on this, Pam, and most people in the room as well. I'm allergic to activities reports from executive directors.
Oh,
I think it's okay if we communicate a bit of what's going on, but I want to see results. I want you to give me the reasonable assurance that the fire's not, raging in the kitchen and people are not dying in the dining room, that we're
oh,
actually doing
yeah.
the work. And so we need results to feed that. And I'll show you a few samples for people in the room that are curious, but we need to slowly move. If we want our governance model to mature, we need to move from a newsroom, so sharing information about activities, to a dashboard and
Mhm.
report on what's
Mhm.
going on, in a sense that, are we meeting expectations? Is there an effective implementation of the mission? Are we realizing the vision? Is there, are the values being lived by everyone? Do we meet satisfaction levels, needs of clients ahead of the trend? That's going to show up in results, not in storytelling. So we're really in reporting here.
Yeah, yeah, and I was going to say, I couldn't agree more. I think it's not about the process, it's about the outcome. And we're not here just to be busy.
I love that.
We're doing something. We're providing a service to the community, or if you're, in the private sector, you're providing a product, but you're always providing an outcome. And so you want to measure your progress against that outcome,
Yeah, and
but not what you did today to get there
well,
necessarily.
and just to, I know not all executive directors like me when I say that, but honestly, I don't really care how busy the ED was. I just
I
want to make sure the results are there, because in the end, there's one particularly important line in an executive director's contract. You will manage effectively every aspect of the
Mhm,
organization,
mhm,
period.
yeah,
Just show me that it's going well. Being busy is not a KPI. So we need to be able to feed all of that information the same way you do when you buy a car. You look at the data before deciding. Of course, you'll look at what it looks like, but you want to make sure it meets financial performance. Everything that you're looking for needs to be there so you can make that decision. Same thing here. And obviously, the last one, always act in the best interest of the organization. We've talked about that in the previous ones. So, can we talk a bit, without scaring anyone, Pamela? Can we talk a bit about consequences of neglecting due diligence? Is there any story or information you can share with us that can help us bring a bit of motivation to being more diligent?
it's like anything. When things go wrong, they will go very wrong. It's really rare that it goes a little bit wrong. So, and then the problem is, if your governance structures aren't solid, or if they're solid and haven't been followed, then the bigger question is, how do you fix the problem? So it's like everything. Things go wrong. You mentioned earlier, people make mistakes, things go wrong. But if you've got a good structure around you and it's been followed more or less, then it's not that hard to pull things back and get it back
Mhm.
on track.
I like
But
that.
there's some pretty awful things that can go wrong, and I don't really want to scare people today, but the house of cards can fall apart very quickly. Um, Typically, what happens in not-for-profits and in for-profits as well is that the organization will indemnify the directors if something goes wrong. And that basically means that they will make good on any harm that might come to the directors as a result of that whatever that goes wrong. However, if the director doesn't do what the director is supposed to do, then this can all fall apart, because that's all backed up by insurance, and then the insurers cannot insure. And so there's a lot that can go wrong, Alain. But
You know, and I don't
yeah,
want to scare anyone either.
yeah,
But
no,
I've seen, so everything worked out, but still I've seen directors being called by CRA, being asked what happened here because, deductions weren't
oh yeah.
sent to CRA, and then
Well, and they
directors are individually and solidarily responsible for those. It
there's
was a big number. It scared a lot of people, but to fix it took 12 months.
yeah,
So, and all they needed to do was a confirmation from the executive director on a document somewhere that demonstrated that yes, we did pay. Or
yeah,
let's make sure that the pay is being done by a pay service instead of just manually done internally. That'll
yeah,
protect us. A few
yeah,
little things like that that could be, major issues. And even though they didn't pay a penny out of their pockets, it took a year of, those calls,
yeah,
right, from
yeah,
CRA.
yeah, yeah.
So,
But
so
and
here, yeah, did you
no, I
want
was
to
going
add
to say
something?
there's just, well, there's because there's two areas, major areas where directors can get into trouble. So, and that's one, as the source deductions, and the other is if you happen to rent an office on a formerly environmental, what would you call it? We call them brown lands, where there have been maybe some pollution on the site, but you didn't
Mm-hmm.
know. So there's due diligence that has to take place no matter what you're doing as a board
Nice.
director. You've just got to make sure you've done. And again, if you've done your due diligence, that's really your protection. That's your protection, right?
Yeah.
Things go wrong, but you've done that homework. You asked those questions. You did everything you could, and still something went wrong. Well, then often, and most often, there's a way out for you,
Yeah.
which is relatively, I won't say easy or painless, but there's a way out. That, because you've done your work, and that's really what you need to show. So this is really important.
Yeah, so let me show you guys some things that I've just pulled out here of our drive. So the habit needs to be, we need to monitor strategic and operational performance using an accountability framework in one case. So this is what's expected from the executive director, and the dashboard will demonstrate that these expectations have been met. So I'm going to share a policy. I won't show a policy online here of what a strategic, an accountability framework looks like. It's a simple little 3-page document that really breaks down what's expected from the executive director, and that should be reviewed yearly by the compensation committee or the HR committee. I don't like that name, but let's call it that anyways. So we look at it as a committee and as a board every year, and it becomes what's expected from the executive director. And the executive director, in their case, just show up with one of these. So this is a very simple, I think it's a 3-page report on very simple introduction, date, name of the executive director. Oh, that's the French version. I have an English version. Where
Okay.
is it? Oh, I have 2 versions here. Here it is. So strategic objectives and where we're at in different quarters with an overall rating. It could be just a simple arrow towards, up saying it's on track or whatever. There's different ways to do the reporting, and that's the strategic part. And then operational results, some on revenues, donations, cost per beneficiary, and so on, challenges and risks. That's a really simple one. I would use this accompanied with something that looks a bit more like these are the different aspects of a very strong, robust report. So financial first always comes first, I think. Programs and services, satisfaction rates, very simple data. No how, no why, just this is the raw data of how things are going. service quality, human resources, really important, because this is one of the biggest risks, I think, when it comes to legal action. It'll come mostly from HR, then from financial issues. But right now, most of our clients that have legal issues are related to HR stuff. And then community engagement, so we can see events and participation rates and governance and compliance. And obviously we can put some data in there, a few things on communications, a few things on marketing, and just keep it simple. So our clients that are using something like this, once they've gotten into the groove, this is a 3-hour work session between managers, executive director and their managers, to get this ready for the board. 3 hours. That's a lot less work than preparing an activities report of everything you did in the last quarter and so on. This really works well, and once you're in a groove, you meet that expectation of doing the results dashboard, so monitoring strategic and operational performance that way. So you set it up in the accountability framework, but then you operationalize it with a simple dashboard. And this was on a document, not a spreadsheet, but you'll be able to use this and copy paste it in any Excel or Google Sheets, Smartsheet, or other tools that you might be using. I'll share that with you in a follow-up email. Any comments before I move on, Pam?
No, I think that's fabulous. Those are
Okay,
the
so
tools you need in order to oversee the operations of your organization.
and for those who've been there long, interminable ED reports that last an hour, because we're in a narrative and a storytelling about what happened and not on results. You can imagine how the meeting really changes in dynamics when we're looking at results. Not only is it shorter, because I keep repeating, and I hope it's not being condescending when I repeat it, but it's not an executive directors meeting.
Mhm.
It's a board of directors meeting.
Mhm.
It can't be all about the ED. So we need to do our work in a board meeting, not their work in a board meeting. So how do we do that? Well, let's talk about results, do that part, then let's talk about our work. And anyways, let's keep going. The third one is clarity. So when it comes to the board role and responsibility, I think there's often we assume what we should be doing instead of clarifying it, documenting it, and making sure we're on track. So you'll probably see a very robust link between this one and the first one. Once clarity and roles and responsibilities are in place, your compliance dashboard changes a bit. So you're able to just check off the list. So I took this from it's a nonprofit, the Ontario legislation and the federal one as well. It's a simple line, and there's a very powerful word there, 2 letters. The board is responsible for managing or overseeing management. And that little "or" word is really the difference between an operational board, to me, where all board members are involved in making sure everything works, like that little board of directors that organize a festival every year. They're in activities, they don't have financing, and they're just doing all the work. Then they're managing. Or they have an executive director and they signed the contract with someone that does the management. So then they're in an overseeing role. I really like that word, and that's why I always put it in caps here, because you can't do both at the same time. It's really, really hard to be responsible while doing both at the same time. I don't know if you want to comment on this. It's one simple sentence there, but it's a powerful one to me.
No, absolutely. And I think this is where boards get themselves into trouble. They want to do both. But typically it'll be those who should be overseeing, because if you're managing a board, typically it's because there's no other way to have the board function. There aren't the finances, there isn't the scope. But if you're supposed to be overseeing, don't manage. So yes.
Absolutely. So most of you have seen this little diagram. We did this with Jim Brown a while ago, and we sort of added our little colors in there, but also a few little items. And I don't want to go through this too much. There's just one really, I'm going to go two little components here. First thing is this line, and I remember doing this with Jim, and I think Pamela, you were there once when we were
Mm,
doing it.
mm,
The above the line and below the line, it's really between being in the what or the how. And when we're overseeing management, this is where this line is so important.
mm.
There's a reason why I put this, how do you call those lines?
Dotted
Dotted
line.
line is because I think there needs to be a window in the kitchen door.
Mhm,
So you can't go in the kitchen, but you can certainly look in the window. So you need to be able to do that oversight and making sure that everything, all the way down to the delivery of services to clients, are being done properly. That's the
mhm,
reasonable assurance that I want every board member to have when I ask them, when I meet them at a cafe or on the street, how's the organization going? Oh, it's going really well. Really cool. How do you know?
yeah.
You need to be able to answer that question, and that's oversight. To me, it's oversight. So all the reporting goes up because we need to just, in the name of members, we have the fiduciary responsibility to manage or oversee the organization. Let's just keep that window clean so we have a look,
Mhm,
nose in, fingers out. So, yeah, unless
mhm,
there's comments on here, I'm gonna move forward because we've done this diagram so many times. We'll share it though with the follow-up email. So, yeah, a few little things here just to remember. Be participative as a volunteer. It really gets to me sometimes how we tend to uh, bring a lot of value to the fact that board members are volunteers. But I've seen so many times where volunteers on a board are less active than volunteers at the festival that they're offering.
mhm,
Volunteers that are at the soup kitchen actually off serving people.
mhm.
It's an active volunteering when you're on a board. It's not a sexy one because you're reading reports and you're overseeing and you're doing all this management stuff and this governance stuff, but it's still active.
Mhm,
More you're active, the more you're demonstrating diligence. So be prepared and stay informed. So, as most of you know, we do a lot of assessing board performance and evaluations. And the biggest doléance, complaint from board members is the lack of preparedness of their
mhm,
colleagues.
mhm,
So they prepared, but you might be sitting there, well, I didn't have time. I'm just a volunteer. Well,
mhm,
we're all volunteers around that table, except for the executive director. So we need to give each other that respect of showing up as an active volunteer. And I always recommend sit on at least one, at least one board committee. So there's a concept of independent board members, and they need to be able, you need you need to have more board members, so directors, than officers. I think there should be an imbalance there. More directors than officers. So chair, treasurer, secretary, ED doesn't actually vote, even though they're an officer. There might be a VP. So if you're four officers, I think you should have a structure that has at least five directors, board members. And you can see why right away. These people don't have authority over these people. You're still a whole unit, but it gives that accountability for these people to act when they're working for the board, because that's what officers do. They can be held accountable.
mhm,
But it's a great number, isn't it? Because there
mhm,
should be three committees over governance, finance, probably an HR/compensation committee. Perfect. Three committees, nine people. Love it.
mhm, mhm,
Three people per committee. Get involved. So the more you're involved, the more you demonstrate diligence, but the more respectful people are going to be of your work. And you're going to have more respect for the work of
mhm.
committees as well by being part of them as well. So that's just my 2 cents on this.
And I would add, Alain, I think it's like the old adage, you get out what you put in. And if you don't put very much in, you're not going to get very much out. So it's just a lot more fun and it's a lot more interesting if you are more involved. So it's, you know, it's good for everybody. You know, and that's kind of the icing on the cake. It's not legal and it's not an obligation, but it is just more fun.
Yeah, and it certainly helps you meet that diligence, that due diligence obligation for sure,
Yeah.
because you're there at the meetings and you're participating. And I
Mhm.
have to tell this story. It's going to be very short because I know we're going to run out of time at one point, but we were working with the board at one point, and the secretary of the board, and I'm doing this because she wasn't doing the secretary work. And at one point, we were going through roles and responsibilities of the officers, so the secretary, and she got frustrated and she said, well, I'm not doing that. Why am I not doing that? And the executive director said, well, I'm doing it because, you know, you're just a volunteer and I want to support you. And the volunteer said, well, it's my role. I want to do it. So we need to be careful in removing the roles, the tasks related to the volunteerism, because people will get disengaged.
Mhm.
So when she got clarity on her role, she absolutely wanted to do it. So I think that's just a lesson in humility sometimes when we do something for someone else that is capable of doing it, you're removing them the opportunity to succeed in their role. And that's a big one. I went quickly here. If you don't mind, Pam, I'm going to go through this one because I know I wrote it, so I'm going to go very quickly. One of our concepts is every officers should have their own committee, except for the executive director, because they probably have their management committee internally, so that's fine. Chair oversees board functions, make sure that everything is just going well on the board. They're facilitating meetings, making holding people to account when they're not showing up. They're real chair is leader to me. And they're doing that part, but they're also because they're most of the time it's the single point of contact for the executive director.
Right.
I think the chair should be also overseeing and or leading the executive uh, director's compensation committee, or often called the HR committee
Mhm.
for one HR, just the executive director, not all of
Mhm.
the employees.
Mhm. Mhm.
Secretary, everyone who knows me knows that I hate this title. I call it governance secretary because I think it's much more than just taking notes. So the secretary of the board has really specific responsibilities in traditionally. So we need to oversee the implementation of the governance model and chairs the committee that's responsible for it, which is usually called the governance committee. I like to call it compliance and governance committee. So because all of that goes together, but treasurer would be after that. Obviously, probably the clearest role is the treasurer. Financial oversight, please, please, no one else but the treasurer should be chairing the finance committee. You don't give that to someone else, give them the title to go with it. And that's a key component. If the executive director is going to do the corporate secretary work, give them the title because they're allowed to have it. But having someone named secretary, but they're sitting on their hands, oh, I think that's a trap. Just
Mhm.
telling someone you're a secretary, but if things go bad and you're in front of any tribunal or in court and you're named secretary and you've been doing nothing and you know
Mhm.
nothing about it,
Mhm.
you're going to be on the hot seat. So the
Yeah.
person who's responsible for something should be actively on those committees. And obviously the executive director, which when you look at the definition in the legislative framework is also an officer, has some obligations there. They manage all aspects of the organization. And that's the biggest task of all. So, yeah, I just went quickly there. Anything to add?
There's too much to add for the time we have, but
Okay.
it's okay. It's good. It's a great high level summary.
Yeah, so I think I have it here. I have the French versions, but I will share with everyone two things. Roles and responsibilities for officers, including the committees. So the mandates of the committees, they're just standard templates. You can find great ones on ChatGPT as well. So I'm just going to share you ones we have, and also the code of conduct for the board that also includes yearly declaration of interests that you might have outside of your involvement with that organization. And we always recommend you just review those annually so everyone's aware, and re-sign the code of conduct annually just before the AGM. And when someone is also giving their candidacy to be a board member, make sure they sign it before they're elected, not after. They need to know what they're getting involved in, and they can't not agree with the code of ethics. So you show them before that they will have to declare their interests, meet these responsibilities, do this role, and sign a document to attest to it. Does that make sense to you, Pam?
Yeah, no, it's very important because part of the code of conduct is the conflict of interest declarations, and that changes often over the course of a year, and the obligations are pretty strict. So very important.
It's also a great way to keep people accountable without telling them, you're not doing your job. No, sign this again. I know that's a hard
Put the
piece.
iron fist in the velvet glove.
I know. That's not what I'm not like that. That's my problem. Sometimes I'm too let's keep going because I know we're spending a lot of time on these, but they're so important. So let's take our time anyways. I think board efficiency is a key component to being responsible because it's also linked to competency. And so ensuring that there's an efficient board operations, because I know that I always say you shouldn't be involved in the how of the organization except for one thing, the how of the governance. So the how the governance moves forward and evolves with the organization, only the board makes those decisions. It can't be asked, you can't ask the executive director, so how should the board work? No, that's the only one that you should be in the how. So meeting focuses need to be on accountability, compliance, and diligence. So accountability includes the strategy. So I know a lot of people say, well, that's dry. Well, no, not necessarily. Because when you look at results more than objectives, there's a total different dynamic around the table. I think using recurring agendas, and I have examples that I will show you, ordre du jour perpétuel, standard agendas for boards should be, ED's report first, let's get that reasonable assurance, governance committee's report, finance committee's report, executive oversight and compensation or HR committee's report. That should be 60%, if not more, of your board meeting. And if you cover that, you'll probably covered everything you need to cover. And if you're covering more than that, you're probably in operations or in things that if they haven't went through a committee yet, there's probably an issue that should go to committee. So this balances things out in a 4 to 6 board meetings a year and 4 meetings of committees a year. So between meetings, board meetings, there's a committee meeting. It's the same number of hours for volunteerism, but in the end, it changes the dynamics. I don't know.
You raise a really good point, Alain. That is the use of committees. So you're not going to take your board meeting to have a discussion that should be taking place in a committee.
Exactly.
So, and that's a trap a lot of boards will fall into without realizing right away that, oh, that's a subject matter area, should go to that committee. And when they've digested it, they can bring it back and then we'll talk about it. Yeah. So that you're not spinning your wheels.
Yeah, and I want to make sure also here, and I think Jim spoke of it too, and I know that's what you mean as well, Pamela, is that committees bring options to the board. They do work for the board, so the very best decisions are being made, but they're not making decisions for the board. Right. So it's not a rubber stamping here. It's deepening our understanding of issues so we make the very best decisions. So there's all sorts of templates that really help this work, but the recurring agenda, easy to read reports, provided in advance changes everything.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and just meeting the limits of our mandates, so roles and responsibilities are respected. If I think committees help with that,
Mhm,
that this is where boards get into trouble, people doing everyone else's work.
mhm,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Um, I I know this one's self-explanatory, but I think I don't know if you want to cover these, Pam, or I can go through them.
Um, I think we sort of touched on some of these things earlier. Board members maintaining governance and sector-specific skills is being aware, um, not only of well, I mean, the regulatory environment changes, your competitor environment changes, your service area needs change. Just to be aware of what what is happening. What kinds of changes affect the work that you're doing as an organization. Um,
Yeah,
and if there are and there's always this the maintaining governance specific skills. There's always best practices, right? I mean, today we're talking about today's best practices, but Alain, this is your whole area of specialty. I mean, these things change. We
they
learn
do.
and we evolve, and so just to be sure that what you're doing as a board continues to reflect the best the best of what boards can do. So there's all of that. Understanding your client needs. This is where you're going to be leaning on your ED to be bringing you information that you can use as a board to satisfy yourselves that you are performing, that the organization is fulfilling its mandate, using your practical tools to evaluate performance. You've alluded to those, Alain. Uh,
Yeah,
and yeah, and yes, and so when you have board positions to fill, you want to also, are we getting ahead of ourselves when we're talking about skills and recruiting? Because we talk about board skills matrices and things like that.
yeah.
So yeah. Um,
And I'll share one of those with you in a follow-up email on this webinar. But I, most of our clients that used to say we can't find board members, as soon as they recruit based on skills, they have to do interviews.
mm,
Isn't that interesting? So
mhm,
moving from we need board members, please join, to we need someone on our finance committee that joins the board. We need people with these skills or those skills. People actually submit their candidacies. Um, I, I'm gonna go quickly on the first one here. So sector specific skills. And I remember sitting with the board at one point that had refused in their budget for their community radio to put some money aside in case the antenna broke.
mm,
So not knowing sector specific knowledge, most people around the table thought that it was a $500 antenna that you put on the building. But it's actually sort of a bulb. It's worth about 100 grand.
mhm,
And when it did break, they were uh, offline for a month and a half because they didn't know the
mhm,
decision was not the very best one. So
mhm,
when we recruit on skills, it's also related to the sector of the organization and its mission and so on. And for the second one, I keep saying that you can't think strategically if you don't master or understand the needs, satisfaction levels, and trends of your clients.
mhm,
There's no strategy if you don't understand that because you're not a client, you're a board member.
mhm,
So you need all of that data to understand your market. So in this case, the habit is to just maintain a routine in your governance. So I have that really colorful governance calendar that I'll share with you. Standing agenda, I just showed you. Recruitment practices, I'm going to share a skills matrix, but just sit down with a few board members and just look at those and try and implement at least one or two per year in the next 2, 3 years. It'll change the dynamics of who's on your board and how they're actively being part of it as well. I'm going to go through this one very quickly because when it comes to risk management, we've done tons of webinars on this and it's going to come back. There's probably going to be more in the fall, but risk management needs to be at the center of how we think. It's a culture much more than just something you check off the compliance list. So I think that we need to be vigilant by making sure that our documents are perfect. So when it comes to minutes, reports, and so we need to keep tweaking those to make sure that we can show our work. So document all the boards and committees' work. It needs to be somewhere on a drive so you can pull it out when there's trouble. Or when you're just not sure what you decided, 3 months ago at the previous quarter. Ask questions on management and committee reports, use performance evaluation tools, request evidence and data that support results, and assess and monitor risk that could threaten the organization. And here it's basically, and I have a policy, I have the French one here, but I'll share a policy on risk management and a risk management matrix and the link to Jerry Morin and Julie's webinar on the whole how to implement risk management strategy in the board. And you'll be able to use those tools and that little video to just bring it all together for your board. I don't know if you want to add anything on risk management and the fact that doing the work and having it in the policy,
Mhm,
I know they go hand in hand,
mhm.
and policy is important, but the practice needs to be there as well. I don't know. Anything to,
I think that's it. You just have to do the work. And if you've done the work, then basically that's the best you can hope for.
excellent. Cool. Well, I want to thank Pamela for her presence today, and two webinars coming up. One on the 22nd of April en anglais. There's also a French version of these two webinars that are coming up on the same day. So, change management and emotional intelligence, two inseparable tools. My colleague Melanie and Micheline are going to be all over this one. Change management without that little human touch. uh, the stats are really staggering um, on success when it comes to change management. And also, how do you know your organization is performing? And this is a governance one here. So we're going to talk about in much more details here how to have that reasonable assurance that your organization is performing or even outperforming the expectations, and what the board can do to just create that little accountability culture that we want for the executive director to report on those results. And that is also on the 22nd in the evening at 5:30, and then the French one will be at 7. And that's it for today. And if you want in the chat, you can set up, just put one word to describe your session. And Pamela, thank you so much for your time and
Pleasure.
expertise. And we're going to share information with the Pamela's LinkedIn maybe link so you can find her. And we'll see you next time. Thank you so much.